resolved it to this point, and yet when she was gone, I felt so the pieces together because I had drug around my entire life, boxes and boxes.
At 78, Sally Field no longer needs to smile to be loved. 2 golden Oscars, a career filled with roles etched into public memory, and the affection of millions who followed her on screen. But behind the stage lights, beyond the prolonged applause, is a woman who still remembers, deeply, every moment she was dismissed, disrespected, turned into a shadow in her own story. Some wounds are never closed by an apology. They simply sit there in silence, like tattoos no one can see. Sally Field chose silence for decades. She chose composure over confrontation, patience over exposure. But now, with nothing left to prove, and everything worth saying, she names the 7 men who broke her the most. Colleagues who weren't just names on posters, but dark chapters in a memoir never written in ink, only in tears. If you ever loved Sally Field, if you were ever moved watching her cry on screen, then maybe it's time to hear her cry for real, not in a role, but as a survivor. Don't look away. A truth is just beginning. If you've ever been dismissed, ever been silenced in your own story, stay. This story is ours. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Not for a scandal, but to hear truths long buried beneath the glamour of Hollywood.
Ultimately, the only way I could get out of many things was to tell people I had lost my mind.
The first name that must be mentioned, Tommy Lee Jones, silence that doesn't belong on screen. Some roles don't require words, just a glance, a pause, a pain soaked into every breath. Sally Field stepped into such a role in 1981, when she agreed to star in Backroads, a story about 2 broken souls finding each other on the fringes of America. But what she didn't expect was that the real loneliness would come from the man standing right next to her, Tommy Lee Jones. From the very first day on set, without a harsh word spoken, Jones made every space between them feel frozen. He barely looked at me, Sally recalled. No greeting, no eye contact, no sense of partnership at all. What unfolded wasn't a shared performance, but one person trying to spark a flame, while the other stood in the dark. Tommy Lee Jones, known for his reticence and aloof demeanor, didn't bother hiding it. He made no effort to connect, didn't share even a breath of common ground. He arrived, said his lines, and left. No more, no less, and no space for anyone to come closer. We played 2 wounded people learning to love each other, Sally remembered, but the whole time, I felt like I was in a monologue. She tried to break the ice, small questions between takes, a few gentle jokes. But what she got in return were silent stares, if even that. I had the feeling he didn't think I belonged there, she said, not with anger, but with sadness. Every time he turned away, she sank deeper into a feeling of invisibility. The result wasn't surprising, Backroads flopped. Critics panned it for the lack of chemistry between the leads. But those on set knew, that wasn't a script issue. It was 2 heartbeats that never found the same rhythm. I was drained, Sally confessed. Not by the role, but by the isolation. Nearly 30 years later, on Watch What Happens Live, when asked who was her worst on-screen kiss, Sally simply smiled, Tommy Lee Jones. Maybe he's different now, I don't know. But back then, it wasn't a good time. She wasn't bitter, she even added, God bless him. I still hold a soft spot for him in my own way. Then one day, as unexpectedly as the man himself, Jones walked up to her at an event. I'm sorry, he said. Just 3 words, but enough to close a chapter that had begun in silence. In 2012, they reunited on the set of Lincoln. No more coldness, no more avoidance. They worked together, not close, but no longer distant. Both received nominations, both fulfilled their roles. Tommy Lee Jones has never spoken publicly about what happened on Backroads, but insiders say he's changed. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's regret. But for Sally, that no longer matters. And as she once admitted herself, to be loved, she had to disappear. With Tommy, she didn't disappear, she simply wasn't seen. The second, Robert Blake, when the storm isn't a moment, but a presence. Some wounds don't come from words or actions, but from being forced to exist in a space where every breath is ruled by the storm of the person beside you. When Sally Field took the lead role in Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole, she believed it would be a memorable project, a layered character, a powerful co-star, a promising script. But from the very first day on set, she sensed something was wrong. Not because the lines weren't polished. Not because the director lacked focus. But because of the man sharing the frame with her, Robert Blake. Blake didn't come to set to tell a story. He came to test everyone's limits. Each day, a different version of him arrived. One day, the creative free spirit, tossing out the script, improvising at whim. The next, a man furious because the lighting didn't match his skin tone. Then another day, he'd walk in silently, only to leave mid-scene because he didn't feel it. For Sally, this wasn't acting anymore. It was systematic sabotage. She tried to hold the crew together. Stay professional. Step in gently when Blake lashed out at the lighting coordinator, or screamed at the sound guy over an imaginary mistake. But soon, she realized, she was being drained. Not by the role, but by having to clean up the emotional debris left by someone who cared for no one but himself. I wasn't acting anymore, she later said. I was just trying to survive from one scene to the next. The project never had a real chance. Before the film could be completed, it was postponed, then quietly shelved without a press release, without an explanation. And no one asked why. Everyone already knew. They just didn't want to say his name anymore. But for Sally, it wasn't just a professional failure. It was a deep emotional blow. A co-star who doesn't respect you doesn't just ruin a scene, they can make you doubt your own worth. Robert Blake never spoke up. No explanation, no belated handshake, no admission. When he passed away in 2023, Sally said nothing. Not out of hatred, but because there was simply nothing left to say. Some people make you disappear just so you can survive around them. But with Blake, she didn't get the chance to disappear. He had already erased the space the moment he walked in. The third, Shirley MacLaine, when the spotlight isn't shared. They stood side by side on the poster. Smiled brightly in photo shoots. And on screen, they were the Heart of Steel Magnolias, a film that captured the friendship, pain, and resilience of Southern women so authentically it moved the world to tears. But behind the scenes, where there were no scripted lines, no director to guide them, no audience to applaud, was a different story. Sally Field came into that film carrying a bleeding heart. Her role, as a mother witnessing her daughter's death, demanded every emotion, every ounce of depth, every unguarded opening. She came to live the part. But Shirley MacLaine didn't see her as a teammate. From the very first table read, the air shifted. Shirley didn't need to raise her voice or interrupt anyone. With just a raised eyebrow, a half smile, a step into the room like no one else existed, she drew a line. Shirley didn't sabotage. She controlled. With the poise of an Oscar winner, she adjusted lines, demanded scene pacing changes, offered critiques while her co-star was mid-tears. Everything was for the role, but it warped the raw emotion, because how can you portray real grief when someone keeps pulling you out of it? The breaking point was a scene Sally never forgot, the funeral monologue. A moment meant to unleash unfiltered sorrow. She was ready. But it took 17 takes. Not because she couldn't get there, but because Shirley kept interrupting, a muttered comment, a mistimed scoff, a tone correction. Each time, the moment shattered. Each time, the emotion had to be rebuilt from scratch. When the film premiered, audiences praised the ensemble's chemistry. But Sally knew, not everyone wanted to connect. Some only wanted to stand at the center. Shirley never spoke of the tension. She called her acting style, cosmic instinct, a poetic way of saying no one gets you, and you don't need them to. As for Sally, whenever asked, she said just enough to be understood, but never enough to spark a scandal. Some women act to reach others, she once said. And some act just to hold their place on the stage. There was no reunion, no joint interviews. No mutual admiration like so many co-stars exchange after time softens things. Just two women who once shared a frame, but were never truly on the same side. In a film about female friendship, there was a solitude no one noticed, except the one swallowing it, day after day. If you've ever stood beside someone the world called a partner, but every minute with them made you shrink a little more, then you know exactly how Sally felt. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Not to follow a scandal, but to revisit the rooms you might have once stood in, shoulders straight, back stiff, heart going quiet. If you've ever worked for, loved, or gone silent for someone who overshadowed you, you'll know this story doesn't just belong to Hollywood. It belongs to a whole generation. The fourth, James Woods in the world of acting, trust between two people on set isn't just nice to have, it's essential. A line picked up at just the right beat, a glance held at just the right time, can turn a scene into something legendary. But the day Sally Field stepped onto the set of Kiss Me Goodbye with James Woods, she didn't find a partner, she found a challenger. From the very first table read, something felt off. Woods wasn't acting with her, he was provoking her. He changed lines without warning, moved unpredictably, and brought an energy into every scene that made the whole crew tense up. The director was thrown off, and her co-star was put on the defensive. He was always the smartest person in the room, and he needed you to know that, Sally said. But intelligence without empathy isn't brilliance, it's control. The tension didn't explode, it eroded, quietly. In the middle of a take, Woods turned to the director and pointed straight at her. She's playing it too flat. We need something more real. It wasn't feedback, it was a takedown, and the camera was still rolling. Sally didn't respond. She just left the set, waited until the camera was ready again, and returned as if nothing had happened, but the wound remained. What stayed with her wasn't the public criticism. It was the moment Woods came up afterward, soft-spoken like a mentor, "You can do better. But you're not trying hard enough." To him, maybe that was motivation. To her, it was theft. "I wasn't lacking effort," she later shared. I was being real, but he couldn't see that, because he only recognized emotions that spoke his own language. Gradually, she stopped attending rehearsals. On set, she kept her distance. Every line became a barrier, not because the role demanded it, but because the man in front of her left no room for her to be fully herself. The whole crew noticed. One assistant director recalled, "She didn't retreat, she shut down." Not out of weakness, but because no one deserves access to the deepest parts of her craft if they don't bring respect with them. The film ended, no scandal, no public fallout. But for Sally Field, it was the first time she truly understood, intelligence isn't always a support. Sometimes, it's a boot pressing down on the fragile truths someone else carries. Woods, for his part, never apologized. Asked years later about the experience, he said, "I push people to their limits. If they can't take it, maybe they're in the wrong business." Sally wasn't surprised. She wasn't even hurt anymore, she just remembered. Because some co-stars don't need to be named again, but the feeling of standing beside them never fades. The fifth, Dustin Hoffman, when a room isn't yours to speak in. People often think deep wounds come from long relationships, from years of connection and eventual collapse. But sometimes, all it takes is a single afternoon, a small room, and someone far too used to being the center of everything, to leave a scar that never fades. Dustin Hoffman wasn't a co-star. He and Sally Field never made a film together. What they shared was just an audition, a few short hours, but enough to teach her a brutal truth about how power works in this industry. She walked into that room ready. 2 Emmys. 1 Oscar. Not to show off, but to say she no longer needed to be discovered. But Hoffman didn't see that, or maybe he did, and chose not to. From the start, he dominated the room, joking with producers, cracking wise while the director tried to focus, flipping through the script with a smirk. And Sally? She hadn't even said a line before he cut in. "Slow that down," he interrupted. "You shouldn't say that line like that," he frowned. It wasn't feedback. It was control. It felt like being put back in school, she recalled. Except this teacher didn't want you to improve, he wanted you to lose. By the end of the session, she wasn't just tired, she felt erased. And then, a friend in the industry whispered what Hoffman had said afterward, "There was no chemistry. And I'll make sure that sticks." That wasn't an audition. That was quiet manipulation, a man using humor and status to make someone else feel small, invisible, unnecessary. Sally Field stayed silent about it for decades, not out of fear, but because she understood, things like that were once considered normal. Part of the job. A rite of passage every actress was expected to endure. But she also knew, just because something is common doesn't mean it's right. Hoffman never apologized. Never brought it up again. But he's not the only one whose name appears in stories like this, stories where process was really an excuse for arrogance, and artistic instinct just a mask for domination. Sally didn't call it a trauma. She called it clarity, a moment of seeing clearly who is allowed to take up space, and who always has to ask for permission to exist in it. Because sometimes, the deepest hurt doesn't come from a fight. It comes from a room where you were never allowed to speak. They were not the same kind of people. Not the same kind of pain. Some used silence to push her away. Some used laughter to deny the pain she was living. Some manipulated emotions with words disguised as intellect. And some simply didn't look. None of them shouted. None of them insulted her in front of a crowd. None pushed her to the ground. But in one way or another, they made a woman question her very presence, in her work, in the frame, in moments that were supposed to be hers. Sally Field doesn't tell these stories to place blame. She doesn't speak with resentment. She doesn't need to. She tells them because it's time those memories stop lying in silence, the silence she once believed was necessary for survival. And because she knows, somewhere out there, there are many other women who've stepped out of a room, their hearts tightened, and no one but them understood why. This is not a list of people she hated. This is a list of moments when she disappeared, and now, she chooses to show up again. Because once you've learned how not to disappear, no one can make you go silent. If you've ever felt that way, walked out of a meeting, a room, or a relationship with your heart gone quiet, leave a comment. Not to complain, but so that others like you know, they are not alone.